Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining all of us, or me and everybody else here behind the scenes. Hope you had a good, quick little lunch, and I'm going to dive right in. So if you meant to be at the math, language, and story problem strategies, you're in the right place. And I'm Meagan Hymes. So I'm currently the program supervisor at Metro North Blaine. But I previously, for the last 10 years, have been an ABE instructor in mostly one-room schoolhouse settings, mostly in correctional settings. And what you're about to see was actually put together collaboratively with a colleague of mine, Lindsay Poost, who is not here with us today, but in spirit she is. So this was originally, just so you know, a 2-hour presentation. I have condensed it to share it with you here today. So while I would love for it to be extremely interactive, it's going to be minimally interactive because I want to try to get the information to you. But the full presentation is in the participants folder and all of the resources that we use to put all of this together. So you will have that at your disposal after that is made available to you after the session today or after the conference is over today. Just a couple of objectives would just be one, just to identify the importance of why student participation is necessary in sense making in numeracy. You know, it's what we've moved into now, where really when the students are participating, it's much more meaningful, and they tend to carry that knowledge with them for longer periods of time. And then just to contemplate how you can use some of these strategies in your classroom. Again, I'm going to move pretty quickly, and I will please feel free to pop things in the chat, and I will address questions that come up. But just contemplate. This is right. No one's expecting you to become an expert today. This is just giving you some ideas. And think about too the range of your class. All of the things that we're going to talk about today have can be used and have been used in multiple levels, from low literacy up into GED prep. So just think about your students and how it might look in your classroom. All right, so our agenda, why focus on language and numeracy? Then we'll talk about some number lines, which is really just trying to give some everyday routines that can be done to continue building language describing math. Then we'll talk about story problem, providing that structure to even take developing that language, that math language further. And then a quick debrief if we have time at the end, but I'll also give you my contact information, so you can always feel free to reach out to me with any further questions if we don't get to them today. So setting the stage. Why address language and numeracy? Right? It's important to know why we're doing these things, but also it's important to share with students. So I believe in transparency. And when I'm teaching, I always let students know, hey, this is why we're doing it. And sometimes, you know, they don't like the why, but it's reality. So everyday life, numeracy shows up everywhere. And sometimes students are like, you know, oh, right. All of us have probably heard students say, I suck at math, or I hate math, or I'm not good at it. Okay, well, let's work on that. But that's why it's important, because it's in everyday life. Anybody who has future college and career goals, they're going to need numeracy, and language is a big part of that. It's not just about being able to calculate something, you know, and come up with an answer, but really being able to engage with things that are coming up in college, and how that all is integrated. Interpretation, which as an instructor, you all know, this is big, particularly with any sort of story problems, testing. It's not just always, right, some sort of 4 + 2 on a page. Students need to interpret information, graphs, and all of that takes language understanding. It informs citizenship. Numeracy is a big deal. It's, you know, if people can't understand when they're going to go vote, why they would vote for a particular person, and all they see is some graph, and the graph is skewed and they don't understand how to read it, right? This is all part of numeracy, all important. And then personal agency, right? Students deserve access to information that affects them, and to be able to make their own decisions and not rely on possibly false information from other sources or other people. So this is why it's important to talk about both language and numeracy together, because they don't exist really separately all that much in our world. Also, just because it addresses standards, right? We always want to be paying attention to the standards. And even if you're teaching math, the reading anchors fall into when you're talking about word problems, determination, words and phrases. Those are all reading components and reading standards. It's also part of our TIF framework. And again, I talked about a few of these on the last slide, is just learning strategies and then that critical thinking skill. And again, this is how language and numeracy are connected. And then moving right along, the important piece of all time, because our students get stuck, they feel stuck. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to look at this. I don't know where to start. Right. In my classroom, I always called it, well, a student actually coined it a brain jam. I have a brain jam. The nice thing about it is that we can help them get unstuck by helping them develop the language they need to dive into the materials. So for now, put your student hats on, and this is where I want you to be thinking about how you could possibly use this in your classroom. The number lines that we're about to go over are really thinking about them as a routine that you can use in your classroom to start either developing the language or further developing the language. And I'll show several levels of how this can look, from low literacy to higher. And and feel free to pop things in the chat, like I said, and I'll address them as I can. And here we go. So looking at this picture right now, and this is something you could display to your students. I'm going to talk to you like teachers, but you think like you're your students. And how could you describe where M is in the row? So using any words, even words that are not English, how could you describe where M is? 3 from the right. Thank you, Susan. So 3 from the right. The middle, in the middle. Nice. Yes. Right. So we can talk about where M is, middle, next to the H. So next to, middle, 3 from, center, behind the blue chair, between H and X. Great. Yes, exactly. And this is how even students with low language ability, you could start to develop this mathematical language. In between, near, next to, nice, center, middle, all of these numeracy pieces in the language that are important, and you can push this further. So here, now you could ask your students, why don't you rephrase some of these statements, or one of your classmates, and now describe where 3 is. And feel free to pop something in the chat if you have an idea. How would you describe now where 3 is? Between 2 and 4. Oh, bottom, middle, under M. Between 2 and 4. Nice. Thank you for all of you who are participating. Yes. Where the blue chair used to be. Love it. Thank you, Amber. But good, right? Noticing a pattern change, something changed. And again, this can be a warm up. So now, right, these are some of the things that people or students have said. Halfway between, right, developing this language. Here's one you could give to students, or maybe you'd get a student who would say this depending on their level. 3 is equidistant to 2 and 4. Or 3 is 1 less than 4. So you can start from the top, but you can push students right towards the language of then thinking about, oh, how might this relate to something we're going to also be doing in our math topics? And it's just by a picture presented to them. And I want to mention, right, these things can also be done whether you're teaching online or in person. So they can be used in either context. And then 3 is 1 greater than 2. Right, it would be great if we showed this and all of our students said this right off the bat, but they don't always have the language. And it doesn't mean they don't understand the concept, but they don't have that language. And so doing things like this can help them develop that language to get there. Now here with 3 on a number line, what new ways could you use to describe where 3 is? So now we're moving from just this picture of chairs and we're introducing the number line. Or maybe if you have students who've already seen the number line, you're starting to talk about, how do we talk about a number line? How do I look at a number line? What does it mean? Anybody want to give me a few ideas here? So what new ways could you now describe where 3 is by looking at the number line? All right, nice. Thank you, Amber. 2 hops to the right of 1. So 2 hops to the right of 1. 2 hops. I like it. Any other ideas? 3 is on the lower side of the number line. Right, and you could push a student to say more about that. Say more about that. What do you mean the lower side? Why is this the lower side? Does that mean this is the higher side? And maybe a student might say, oh, thank you, Rebecca. Number to the left of 4. Right? And again, start talking about this number line. Well, and just to go back for a second, if this is, to the left of the middle, because if this is the lower side, then if this is the higher side, so this is the middle. And again, I know this piece seems simplistic, but you can continue to push it. 3 is on the left side, 3 spaces from the left end. Yes, and again, all of this language, the idea here is really to keep pushing the language and empower students to use language to describe what they're seeing, right? Tell me what you see, tell me what you know, tell me what you think, and it's helping to develop that language. So similar to what we were talking about with the seats before, this is something you could put up for them, right, to start building frames. 3 is, and you could fill them in, what everyone was just saying, where 3 is. You guys are just so beyond. All right. And then just providing those frames, right? So again, if students need the support, providing the frames for them, put them up, put them on the screen, have students have them in their notebook. As they're developing the language, give them a way. Oh yeah, I have these sentence frames. Blank is halfway between blank and blank. If you want them to use equidistant, if you want them to use greater than or less than, whatever language it is you're trying to help develop, give them those frames and then give them the context in which they can start to use that language to keep moving forward. So just things to consider for your class. How are numeracy and language components working together right now for you? And in what ways could implementing new routines like this be beneficial or maybe challenging for your students? And that would be one place to start in thinking about how to implement this in your classroom. Moving right along here. All right. This is where you can push it now. So once students become a little more comfortable, you could now take away some of the supports on the number line. And now you would ask your students something like, where would 375 be on this number line? And you can ask them, and as I'm asking you, to individually think about it. Where would you put 375 on this number line? So now, if I asked you to actually put it in a sentence frame, anybody willing to share or try to describe to me where they would put 375 on the number line? And you can feel free to unmute yourself too if you feel like chatting would not work. Rebecca says it would be about 1/3 of the way over from the left. Okay, so Rebecca, and I understand what Rebecca is saying, 1/3 of the way, but then you might ask a student, well, what do you mean 1/3? How do I know 1/3? What does that mean, right? There's so much depth that you can use with just a number line in a question like this of diving into, well, what does 1/3 mean? Where is 1/3? Oh, it's here. It's also then helping other students in the class not only develop the math skills, but also the language and numeracy skills that go along with describing that. Great, yes, between the third and fourth dash, closer to the fourth. Nice. So again, it doesn't have to be fancy language, right? Students need to understand that it's okay for them to describe their thinking in whatever way makes sense to them. We're just trying to get them to use language to describe. Find the halfway, and it is less than that. Okay, good. Oh, so nice. So maybe thinking halfway. So if we know, and then I might ask, well, what is halfway between 0 and 1,000? Does anybody know what that is? So I can find it on here. Oh, and then what is the value of each segment? That would be a great next question to push the thinking. Yes, you guys get the hang of this. And so again, this is another way that you can keep pushing, particularly if you're dealing with higher level students, right? There's from the low end, low floor, high ceiling activity. So a little before the fourth. Yes, right? So thanks, you guys. You guys are so great. I'm gonna jump on here. So again, this would just be something you could show to them on screen. This is just an example to show you. How did I figure that out? First I, then I, finally I. Just supporting that language that you have already developed in your classroom, and then giving them a visual that they can rely on. Oh, it's this or it's here. I really love how much is each segment. I'm going to have to push on that a little bit. But it's not just getting them to come up with the language. The point here is also making sure it's displayed in a way that they can still access it. And then again, another example here. So, and just keeping an eye on the time here. So what would you, or where would you put 35 on this number line? And I'm gonna hold on here. Yes. Thank you, Amber. So Amber was sharing that, right? You could get them to visualize it first and then prove it with the mathematics, like label the lines. Yes, and so, right, there's multiple ways to access this. Anybody want to take a stab at describing where they would put 35 on this number line? So Miles is saying, divide the line in half, then count up from 0. Okay. So if we divide the line in half, so about here, and then count up from 0. So that would get us to what? Because that means we have to know, right? If we divide the line in half, less than halfway between the 0 and the first mark. Oh, and maybe that's okay. So maybe I was misunderstanding what Miles was trying to. I apologize, Miles, if I was misunderstanding what you were saying. Yeah, so, and then, so Rebecca is saying less than halfway between the 0 and the first mark. And again, why? Why would it fall down here? So if you start with 350 and then went to 35. All right, anybody else? Oh, yes, I see what you're saying. Thank you, Brian. And Amber's saying, right, 35 is closer to 0 in comparison to 1,000. Okay, good. So now we have some size, right? We're starting to understand 1,000, how big 1,000 is and how small 35 is in comparison. Okay, good. So just some further examples of that. Again, it's helping the students. How can you describe this to me? How can we break this down? How can we think about this? Christy, each tally represents 100, so 35 would need to go before the first tally. Beautiful. Yes, again, trying to describe what we're seeing in the picture. Each tally mark, each mark on the number line is worth a certain amount, each segment. And so we know it would fall into this particular segment. And we could keep pushing, right? 780, and now I've removed all of the segment marks. And right, this is just another way to push student thinking and really get them to dig into that language. Now, where would you put 780 on this number line? There are no tick marks, right? How do you now know where 780 would be or 780 would go? And it's okay. It's after lunch. It's been a long morning. It's been back-to-back sessions. But again, this is just another example of how you could keep pushing it. Even just with working with a number line, you know, this could go, you could keep pushing students regardless of their level. And again, things to consider and how you might implement this in your own classroom. Oh, thank you, Chris. So identify where the half is. So if I go back, I'll go back for a second. So if we try to identify where half is, so if I say half is maybe here, and then using, and of course you could use annotation. Given the time today, I thought it was best to just not have to do a bunch of marking and erasing. But so if you decide where half is, you could say, well, 780 is going to fall on the larger half, or this half, right? If you know where half is. Thank you, Chris. Okay, and so again, things to consider for your class. Just how are numeracy and language currently working? And in your classroom, how was it working in this particular activity? And then how could you implement this in your own classroom? What could that look like? Would there be benefits? Would there be challenges? Maybe you're already doing something like this, or maybe this can give you some ideas to tweak something you're already doing, or maybe you're like, oh, I didn't ever think about doing it that way. But again, it's just trying to think about how this could start to serve the way you use language and numeracy in your classroom. Because again, the focus is on the language. You're trying to develop the language to describe what is happening. All right, now into story problems. And I'll stop right here for a moment. Any questions right now at the moment about the number line and how that is used, or anything? I'll take just a moment. I'll watch the chat box. I am a teacher. I have good wait time. All right, I'm gonna zoom along here then. So story problems, again, is, so for me, the number lines is a daily routine, something that can be done every day during numeracy. You pick a time every day to start to talk about language to build that confidence for students, and then use it. It's a routine that can be done or however many days of the week you want to build in that routine. Now we're going to talk about story problems. And Yes, and thank you, Amber. If a question comes up, please, and at any time, feel free to pop something in the chat. I'm happy to stop and answer your questions. Susan says, I think it would be interesting to have students make number lines and then ask the questions once they have it down. Yes, totally agree, Susan. And again, you know your students better than anybody. And so you would know where to start or what would make sense. So, right, you could take this and back it up, you could add to it. Or depending on where your students are at, you could keep pushing, right? It's a leveled activity. Thank you, Susan. And yes, anything that comes up, feel free to pop it in the chat. So story problems are, at least for me in the classroom, I'm always playing with different ways. How can I, because students see the words and then they're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this, or I didn't know what it asked me, or I don't know what it's saying, or I don't know what it wants, or oh, I didn't realize I had to look at a chart, or right. And so I've played with a lot of how to break story problems down, but also how to give students the language to even talk about the struggle they're having. Well, I noticed this, but I don't get that. And again, it breaks down to the language. Students can get the math if you teach them the math, but a lot of times the barrier is they can't get past the language of the problem to even know where to begin. Back up here a second. So Adam, the language piece seems to be the most significant struggle for ELL students. They get the math, but can't demonstrate their knowledge in word problems. The TABE math test is almost equally a language test. Totally agree, Adam, totally agree. And I will add on to that is that I have mostly taught GED prep, and language is a struggle for even my native speakers. And some of that isn't because they don't have the language, where like an ELL student might not have the language. But even just, and yes, because absolutely they do, but also native speakers, sometimes it's the struggle of they're not sure how to use language to describe math things or mathematical thinking, or they feel like they're not empowered to use the language they have. And so, so thank you for that, Adam, because I do think it's two-pronged. I think there are students who don't have the language developed, and then I think there are students who have the language but don't know how to use it or don't have the confidence to use it. Absolutely, Amber. Building language, confidence provides important access to all content areas. So for me, when I start to talk about story problems with students, and in some ways you might look at what's on the screen right now and be like, well, that's maybe similar to the chairs or the number line. What's a little different about using pattern recognition for language development is that a lot of times the story problems, right, students, it's that critical thinking piece. Now they've got to get into recognizing different patterns and different ways of seeing things. So this is a warm-up I've used before. We've dove into story problems before, and it's really just activating that language. Like, describe anything you see in this picture. And Mary Jo is saying in their multi-level class, I would pair low and high level students to teach and build vocabulary with the number line. Oh yeah, great. Oh, and I'm so glad. Yes, as an everyday routine, Mary Jo really likes this idea. That's great, Mary Jo. Thank you for that. Chris, I see a pattern, 2 blue, 1 red. Chris, can you say more about that? So you see 2 blue, 1 red. Is that all you see? Is there something to the pattern, or is there something more to the pattern? Adam sees red dots, blue dots in a grid. Susan says, I see political parties and more blues. Interesting. Yes. Yes. Oh, Chris, thank you. So it is a consistent pattern, 2, then 1, 2, then 1. Every third dot is red. Great. This is, yep, exactly. Thank you, Michelle. So AAB, right? Now you are using a pattern to describe a pattern and the pattern context. So again, as you can see, even from the chat box, this is a great access point for language to start talking to students about how do you describe things using language when we're thinking about math or mathematical concepts. 10 frame, yes. Okay, before I run out of time. So this is what I use with students. If you haven't noticed, I'm big on like sentence frames and giving students language. But this is something that students, it is posted for them whenever we're working with word problems, and they also have it in their math notebooks. And the columns are labeled. Where can I start? How can I describe? And it gives them the starting point for what to do. Well, if a student says to me, oh, but I don't know where to start, I'm like, look at your column. Where can you start? And one of the first places is, what is the same or different? Can you make groups or take them apart? And again, the dot pattern is one way to start with that, showing them these frames and showing them how that works. How can I describe it? Giving them that language. Right? I see this repeating, and then helping them with it too, right? Someone said, oh, I see 2 blue, 1 red. Great. Do you just see that? Does it happen again? Is there something else about the pattern? Again, it's just trying to support the language, whether they don't have it and need to develop it, or have it and are just not confident enough to use it. And so I highly, it's been very effective for me to just use things like this that students have access to. And then as they get the hang of it, it becomes more natural for them. Again, more patterns to go through. I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly, but so it's how to use these frames. What's the same or different? Do you see any groups? What patterns or whatever do you notice? And showing these patterns, again, relates to breaking down story problems. I know this is just a pattern you're seeing, but think about the way students look at words. It's deciphering, right? They have to decipher what they're seeing, what they're reading. And this just gives them an initial access point to using that language. Here's some sample student responses to these 3 squares, right? One of my favorites is on the big square, I see 4 groups of 3. So, which was great, because what I can tell you is the student who shared that was a student who was really, really struggling, not only with language, but also with math. But the fact that they were able to come up with this and like, oh, on that big square, I see 4 groups of 3. It's like, do you have any idea what you just described? And so it can be from simple things can come big success, I think. So, all right. But before we run out of time, so what I do though with story problems when we're working on them as a group, and again, with multi-level classes, right, you'll know what works best for your students. But when we're talking about breaking them down, typically what I will do, whether I'm working online or in person with students, is I won't provide them the story problem first. Usually I will provide them with a graph or a piece of a visual from the story problem, and first working through, what can you tell me? What do you, and it's a little bit like a notice and wonder, but you're really looking for that math language. It's not just a, well, tell me anything, which is fine to start with, but really you're trying to get them to hone in on the math language you're developing around whatever numeracy activities you're doing in the classroom. And again, you can ask them these questions and post these questions. What patterns or absence of patterns? Right? We're not trying to hide the language from them. We're trying to get them to use it. And I think providing it and giving them frames to do so. And so we're not going to have time to do this. I mean, if you want to type in the chat, you can, but I'm going to click through some of this. Just this graph. What do you notice about it? What do you see? And students might say, oh, I see it just continues to go up. Or another student might say, it looks like it goes flat at one point. Or, whatever your students at whatever level they're at, and you can take them from whatever they might offer. But it gives them a starting point so that when you show them the actual, oh, and I don't know why that's showing up as broken there. That's all right. When you show them the actual word problem, then you can, and again, I haven't asked them to solve anything with numbers, if you notice. I haven't given them an equation or asked them to come up with an equation. All I'm doing is asking them to describe things with language. With this one here, I would say to them, describe what is happening without calculations. I'm not focusing on the number piece, or the mathematical piece. What I want them to do is, how can you describe using language? Faster, slower, overall, compared to, time frame. Keep pushing that language. And then again, these are all in the participant folder. All of these graphs or all of these sentence frames that I use. But where can I start? How can I describe? And this is just another level of, right? The unknown is the variables, the quantities. As they develop that language, you can provide more frames for them to keep working on to describe what they're seeing or reading in a problem. And of course, I'm big on always, we'll draw it. Can you draw it? What can you see? Oh, yes. With a slow reveal graph. I agree, Adam. I think that would be that's a really great idea. See, we all come together and we can all help each other out. Yes, I agree. I love slow reveal graphs. And so using some of these frames, maybe with that, and right, I've used slow reveal graphs, and I have to think back now if I was already using these frames or not when I was doing that. Oh yeah, see, slow reveal graphs, huge plug here. If you don't know what those are, you should check them out. Okay, so, but again, provide them with the language to describe whatever it is you're using. And then again, here's another example of a story problem taken out of or taken apart. And literally the point here is to help students do not calculate anything. I do not want you to use any calculations. I want you to use your language to tell me what you think the answer is here, or how would you get there, or what do you notice? Okay, I can't get to an answer. Fine. What parts can you put together? What parts can you take apart? What can you compare? On this here, how many people had a 3-course meal? Okay, well, what do we know? How can we think about that data? What can be done? What can be described? Can you draw something? It's pushing the language, because when they can describe what they're thinking and what they're seeing, it gives the mathematical piece that much more meaning, and that they will carry forward with them longer. All right, here we go. Debrief and wrap up. So again, I would have loved to have made all of that way more interactive, but we are coming to the end of our time here. So thank you for all the participation that you did give me. What is one way, and you can put in the chat, or if you would like to, you can unmute. What's one way that you foresee the work we did today informing any of your future practice in your classroom, or what questions do you have? Or other ideas like the slow reveal graphs, that's great. If people have other ideas of the way that they would use maybe sentence frames and language with another platform or digital tool. The math warm up with number lines from Mary Jo. Yes, I agree, Mary Jo. Thanks. The vocab, Miles. Yeah, absolutely. It's right. The language piece for me, and I'm sure for all of you, is such a huge barrier for so many students. And again, I want to emphasize that it can be because they're developing the language, or they have the language and they just don't have the confidence to use it. And so giving them opportunities to actually use language in a mathematical context is leaps and bounds in their actual practice then when they are working with equations. Oh, and now it all rolls in. Yes, the quality of the lesson, not the quantity. I agree. Exactly. You can discuss math even without an image, short paragraph or prompt. Yes. Patrick, new to math, so learning how to build math language is very helpful. Yep. Yes, Susan. Describing any activity fosters thinking across subjects, and number line's a great example, and it carries over. So thanks. Well, thank you for your participation. Adam, using sentence frames with the TABE specific vocab would be valuable for ELL students, more exposure to specific math terms. Absolutely. And you could use that even with the number lines, the chairs, any other type of picture. I agree. It's a great way. And Amber just loves how it brings everyone into the conversation. It takes away, yeah, a lot of students, like my students, can't when you have a lesson that gives everyone a chance to be where they are at. Agreed, because it can be multi-level. Students can access it at multiple points. And let's be real, all of us are one-room schoolhouse teachers, whether you actually teach a level or not. All of us have multi-levels in our classroom. And so any way that you can give access to all of them to be developing the same skill is great. Okay, so resources and sources. This is where we pulled a lot of this from. So all of this is in your participant folder. And again, the entire presentation that we've given before is in there. So feel free, and I'm sure there's a recording out there on the Atlas website. If you want to watch the whole thing and see a little bit more of the interaction that we had with the number lines. And then that is it for me. That is how you can contact me. Please feel free to reach out with any questions or ideas. And even though I'm not currently in a classroom, I'm still a teacher and still work with a bunch of teachers. So I'd still love to collaborate and again, answer any questions that you might have. So thanks again for letting me zoom through all of this today. I know it doesn't quite feel the same to me when I'm just feel like I'm talking into a void and there isn't a ton of interaction, but I'm happy to at least still present this information and hopefully give some people some ideas. So